Once again, the Queen of Consort surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The room had been prepared for another controlled palace meeting, another carefully worded discussion where every uncomfortable truth could be softened behind protocol. William had other plans. With Charles, Camilla, Anne, senior courtiers, and household officials watching, the prince placed a private file on the table and said 4 words that instantly changed the atmosphere. "This ends today." Then he opened it and revealed material concerning Camilla that the Queen Consort believed would never leave the most protected corners of the palace. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William did not sit down. The prince had called attention to weeks of tension over access, household authority, and the boundaries separating the current reign from the monarchy he would one day inherit. Buckingham Palace's royal household, the staff structure that supports the sovereign's official work, scheduling, ceremonies, and internal administration, had already been strained by arguments over who could influence future decisions. Charles watched his son closely. Camilla watched the file. The Queen Consort recognized it almost immediately. Her expression changed before William removed the seal, and Anne noticed. The folder contained internal correspondence, handwritten summaries, appointment records, and notes linked to interventions made through Camilla's private office. Charles quietly told his son that certain matters belonged inside the family. William refused to lower his voice. The prince answered that secrecy was exactly what had allowed the problem to grow. Then William opened the file. He did not scatter every page across the table or turn the meeting into spectacle. Instead, the future king identified 3 entries. One concerned proposed staffing around his future household. Another involved access decisions affecting Catherine. A third dealt with ceremonial positioning connected to the next reign. William said each entry crossed the same line. Supporting the present monarch was legitimate, but attempting to shape the next reign without his consent was not. Camilla pushed back immediately. The Queen Consort argued that her office had been protecting continuity, not interfering with succession. William did not accept the distinction. He told her that advice became interference the moment decisions concerning his future household were being shaped without him. Charles remained caught between them. The king understood William's anger, but he also knew what the accusation meant for his wife. Anne, however, had stopped watching the argument. She was studying one date inside the file. Then the Princess Royal spoke. "Go back." William turned the page, and in that instant, the confrontation stopped being about palace procedure. Anne had recognized something far more personal, something that would drag Charles, Camilla, William, and Catherine into a family reckoning. None of them could hide behind protocol anymore. William may have opened the file, but everyone around that table was carrying a different wound. Charles saw his marriage being dragged into a confrontation with his heir. Camilla saw years of carefully built authority suddenly placed under examination. Catherine understood that decisions made quietly around her were finally being exposed. And Anne, watching everyone rather than speaking, seemed to recognize the most dangerous truth of all. This was not simply a fight over Camilla's influence. It was a fight over where the monarchy went next. William's fear was about the future. The prince believed that decisions concerning his eventual household, Catherine's role, and the structure surrounding Prince George had to remain beyond private influence from the current Queen Consort. The future household meant the staff, advisors, duties, and decision-making structure that would support William when he eventually became king. To him, allowing that structure to be shaped now, without his consent, was not continuity. It was intrusion. Camilla heard the accusation differently. The Queen Consort had spent years fighting to be accepted inside royal life, and exclusion from major family decisions still felt like proof that her place could be withdrawn whenever circumstances changed. She looked toward Catherine and asked whether she had known the file would be opened. Catherine answered calmly. She knew William intended to confront the issue. She had not known how far the prince planned to take it. Charles shifted uneasily between them. The king wanted to defend his wife, but William's question forced him into uncomfortable territory. Had Charles personally approved every intervention recorded in the file? The monarch removed his glasses, rubbed his forehead, and hesitated before answering. No. Several entries were new to him. Camilla's expression tightened. The assumption that husband and wife would present one united front had suddenly weakened. Anne broke the silence by returning to the records. The Princess Royal had noticed one name appearing repeatedly beside access changes, staffing discussions, and ceremonial decisions affecting William's side of the family. A senior intermediary connected to Camilla's private office appeared again and again. Anne asked whether the pattern had been checked. William said it had. That mattered. One isolated request could be dismissed as confusion. A repeating chain suggested coordination. Catherine finally spoke again, telling William that whatever came next had to be about boundaries, not revenge. The prince agreed, but his anger had not faded. Charles listened. Camilla remained rigid. Anne kept watching the dates. Then William revealed why he had started gathering the material in the first place. 3 months earlier, one palace incident had convinced him that the line between the present reign and his future household had been deliberately crossed. And once William named that night, everyone understood the explosion had not begun that morning. It had begun with something the palace had desperately hoped would stay buried. Every royal rupture has a moment that seems insignificant, until history turns back and identifies it as the point of no return. For William, that moment came during a private Windsor reception 3 months earlier. Nothing dramatic happened before the cameras. No voices were raised. Yet behind a closed door, an instruction was delivered concerning Catherine's future household, an instruction issued without William's approval. When he learned where it had originated, he did not confront Camilla immediately. He began keeping records instead. William had already been trying to separate his future structure from Charles's current one. The prince wanted decisions about advisors, ceremonial responsibilities, and access around Catherine and their children, coordinated directly through his own office. A future court structure meant the team and system that would support him when he eventually became king. Senior staff had been told that those decisions were not to pass through competing private channels. The boundary was clear. At least, William believed it was. Catherine discovered the breach after the Windsor reception. One of her trusted future household advisors had been quietly removed from a planning session after an instruction arrived through an intermediary connected to Camilla's private office. The princess did not treat it as a scheduling mistake. She immediately told William because the advisor had been selected for work linked directly to their long-term responsibilities. If one person could be removed without their knowledge, then the question was no longer administrative. It was about control. William received the account in a small sitting room at Windsor, and did something that surprised everyone around him. He did not shout. He asked the aide to repeat the instruction word for word. Then the prince sat in silence for several seconds before saying, "From now on, everything gets recorded." Catherine understood what that meant. William had stopped treating the incident as an argument. He was building a record. The pattern grew quickly. 2 other proposed appointments had been challenged through the same private route, and neither intervention carried a formal order from Charles. William began comparing dates, notes, and correspondence. The prince found repeated efforts to obtain advance information about Catherine's engagements and to influence ceremonial arrangements connected to his future role. Catherine saw the same chronology and realized the Windsor incident had not been isolated. That was why William entered the later palace meeting carrying a file instead of a suspicion. Camilla was no longer being confronted over one misunderstanding. The prince believed he had a pattern, and Catherine knew he intended to force an explanation. The history explained his anger. It did not prepare anyone for what came next. William pushed the file toward Camilla and asked one direct question. "Who gave you the right?" For several seconds, nobody moved. The file lay between William and Camilla like something radioactive. Then the prince selected one page, turned it toward her, and asked a question that stripped away titles, ceremony, and every protective layer of royal language. Did you authorize this? Camilla stared at the entry. Charles looked toward her. Catherine remained completely still, and when the Queen Consort finally answered, the explanation only made William more furious. William pointed to a dated instruction requiring Camilla's office to be consulted before certain ceremonial arrangements involving Catherine were finalized. The prince was talking about future household planning, meaning decisions connected to the staff, duties, access, and ceremonial structure that would eventually surround him and his wife. Camilla said her intention had never been to control that future. She argued that overlapping palace structures could create confusion, while Charles remained sovereign, and she had only tried to prevent embarrassment for the king. William rejected the explanation immediately. The prince told Camilla that advising Charles was entirely different from inserting herself into decisions that belonged to his own household. The line, he said, had been crossed when consultation became expectation. Camilla pushed back, insisting that years of experience inside the monarchy had taught her what happened when communication broke down. William answered that experience did not create authority. Camilla rose from her chair. The Queen Consort told him she had spent years protecting Charles from chaos, divided loyalties, and family battles that repeatedly threatened to damage the crown. William stood as well. His voice remained controlled, but the anger was unmistakable. Protecting his father, he said, did not give her power over Catherine or their children. Catherine finally entered the confrontation. The princess had listened while Camilla suggested that William was interpreting ordinary palace communication as hostility. But now she calmly described 2 occasions when her own staff received unexplained changes shortly after information passed through the Queen Consort's office. Catherine did not accuse her of cruelty, she simply asked why the same pattern kept repeating. Charles turned toward his wife. The king asked whether Camilla had personally known about those changes before they happened. She hesitated. It lasted only seconds, but everyone felt it. Anne moved before the argument could become more personal. The Princess Royal cut through the room with one question. Intent was no longer enough, she said. Whether Camilla believed she was helping was beside the point. What formal authority did you actually have? The silence that followed was different. William had challenged motive. Catherine had described consequences. Charles had exposed uncertainty. But Anne had now forced the room toward the one issue Camilla could not answer with loyalty, experience, or marriage. The exact limits of her power were about to be tested. The palace survives emotional storms by retreating into rules, and Princess Anne knew precisely which rule mattered now. Intent could be debated forever. Motives could be defended. Marriages could complicate judgment. Authority, however, could be traced. Anne asked the senior household official to explain in front of everyone where the Queen Consort's formal power ended. Camilla remained standing as the answer was delivered. William said nothing. Charles looked down at the table, and suddenly the private file no longer appeared, merely embarrassing. It appeared consequential. Anne kept the question narrow because emotion had already taken over enough of the room. The household official explained that Camilla could advise Charles, coordinate through her own office, and influence matters the king chose to discuss with her. Formal authority, meaning the recognized power to direct decisions rather than merely suggest them, was different. The Queen Consort could not independently control William's future household or turn her preferences into conditions his staff had to follow. Consultation was possible. Secret approval was not. William listened without interruption. The prince already controlled major parts of his own household and long-term planning, especially decisions involving Catherine and the structure that would eventually support the next reign. That meant Camilla could be consulted when William wanted her advice, but she could not become an unofficial checkpoint. Anne understood the difference immediately. So did Charles. Camilla turned to the king. The Queen Consort asked whether he had ever considered her involvement improper. Charles struggled before answering. The monarch said he had valued her advice for years and often depended on her judgment. but he had never intended that advice to become instruction to William's team. The distinction was careful. It was also devastating. Camilla slowly sat back down. She folded her hands and stopped defending individual entries. Charles had not abandoned her as a husband, but the king had refused to transform marital loyalty into institutional permission. William saw the change. Anne did too. For the first time, the argument was no longer about whether Camilla meant well. It was about what staff had believed they were required to obey. William then produced one final note. The prince read the wording aloud. An intermediary connected to Camilla's office had described one of her preferences as something that must be accommodated. That phrase changed everything. A private wish had not been received as advice. It had been treated like a command. Anne acted immediately. The Princess Royal said the intermediary's access should be suspended while the internal structure was reviewed. Charles did not object. The king's silence became the first concrete consequence of William's exposure. But rules could only define power. They could not repair humiliation. Camilla left, knowing her influence had been publicly limited, and the first person she encountered afterward was Catherine. The princess said nothing. That silence hurt more than William's accusation. Camilla left the meeting without asking Charles to follow. The palace corridor outside was almost empty, but Catherine was there, several steps behind her. For one brief moment, neither woman looked like a queen or a future queen. They looked like two people caught inside the wreckage of the same family. Camilla stopped, turned, and asked Catherine one question in a voice far quieter than anything heard inside the meeting. "Did you truly believe I was trying to push you aside?" Catherine answered carefully, because the truth was more complicated than accusation. The princess said she had never believed every intervention was malicious, but she had repeatedly found herself entering decisions that already seemed half-set before her own household had been consulted. Official routes, the clearly defined channels through which palace offices are meant to communicate and make requests, were now being tightened precisely because informal influence had become too easy to mistake for authority. Camilla listened without interrupting. The Queen Consort's composure finally cracked. Camilla admitted that exclusion frightened her more than she had ever said aloud. She had spent years building a place beside Charles, supporting the king through pressure, criticism, and family fracture. The thought that the monarchy might simply move forward without any space for what she had helped build terrified her. Catherine heard the fear beneath the defensiveness. The princess did not excuse what had happened, but she understood why Camilla had kept reaching into spaces that were never truly hers to control. Catherine then revealed something the Queen Consort had not expected. She had urged William not to expose several deeply personal pages from the file. The princess believed the confrontation needed to remain focused on institutional boundaries, not private humiliation. She had supported the prince's demand for limits, while refusing to let anger become vengeance. That revelation unsettled Camilla more than William's fury had. The Queen Consort realized Catherine had protected her even while standing against her. Opposition, she now understood, was not the same as cruelty. Catherine had wanted the boundary restored, not the woman destroyed. For the first time that day, Camilla had no sharp answer ready. Inside the meeting room, Charles was reaching the same emotional edge from another direction. The king authorized a review of overlapping responsibilities, while Anne remained beside him, and William waited in silence. Then the monarch asked everyone except his son to leave. Anne understood immediately. She left without argument. William stayed. The door closed, and for the first time that day, there were no officials, no wives, no advisors, and no private file between father and son. The crisis had finally stopped being about Camilla's influence. Now Charles had to face the choice he had spent years avoiding. When the final aide left, Charles closed the door himself. William remained beside the table, but the file was no longer open. What followed was not another argument about palace procedure. It was the conversation beneath every argument they had avoided for years. How Charles's loyalty to Camilla had shaped his decisions. How William's memories of his childhood shaped his distrust. And how both men had allowed history to enter rooms where the future was supposed to be decided. Charles spoke first. The king admitted that years of conflict surrounding Camilla had trained him to defend her almost instinctively whenever he sensed exclusion. That reflex had become part of their marriage, but it had also blurred judgment. William listened because the issue was no longer formal authority. It was inherited emotion. The prince understood that his father had spent years protecting the woman beside him, yet he also knew that loyalty could become dangerous when it started shielding behavior that needed to be questioned. William admitted his own instincts were just as fierce. The future king said that anything touching Catherine or the children immediately put him on guard. George, in particular, represented more than a son in this argument. He represented the next generation that would eventually inherit the consequences of decisions made now. William told his father that he could not allow unresolved family loyalties to become palace procedure simply because everyone was too uncomfortable to challenge them. Charles asked the question directly. If Camilla had not been involved, if the same pattern had come from another senior royal, would William still have opened the file? Yes. The answer came immediately. William then said something quieter. He had never wanted to humiliate Charles. The prince knew exposing the file in front of others had hurt his father, and he did not pretend otherwise. But he wanted a boundary strong enough that George would never inherit another generation's private conflicts disguised as duty. Charles heard the distinction. For the first time that day, the king stopped defending the past and started thinking about the future. Charles accepted the principle. Camilla's household would remain completely separate from decisions concerning William's future reign unless the prince explicitly invited consultation. The king did not soften the rule. He only asked for one concession. Camilla should not be publicly stripped of dignity for the sake of proving that the boundary existed. William agreed. That was the compromise. Firm institutional limits without personal destruction. Charles would protect his wife's dignity. William would protect his future household's independence. Neither man got everything he wanted, but both finally understood what the other had been trying to defend. By evening, however, the palace still had to explain why responsibilities had suddenly changed. The private reckoning was over. The public one was about to begin. By sunrise, the secret no longer belonged to the palace. Phones lit up across London. Broadcasters abandoned scheduled segments. Royal correspondents crowded the pavement outside Buckingham Palace, searching for confirmation of the extraordinary confrontation inside. But one image captured the mood better than any commentary. Beneath the palace gates, a newspaper front page showed William walking alone beneath the headline, "The Future King Draws the Line." Within hours, the photograph had become the symbol of a monarchy, visibly changing generations. The palace moved quickly to contain the story. Its official statement confirmed that household responsibilities were being clarified to preserve clear lines between the Sovereign's office and the future Prince of Wales structure. The Sovereign's office means the staff and authority serving the reigning monarch, while William's future structure concerns the team and responsibilities that will support his eventual reign. The wording was controlled. The public interpretation was not. Commentators immediately saw the changes as evidence that the prince was taking firmer control of his future. Camilla watched the morning coverage alone. The Queen Consort heard broadcasters dissect every phrase and every suspected consequence before Charles finally joined her. She switched off the television before the king sat down. Camilla told him quietly that she did not need him to defend what she now understood she should never have controlled. Charles said little. The monarch had spent years protecting her instinctively. But this time, the admission itself carried more weight than reassurance. William felt no triumph. At Kensington Palace, the prince saw the same front pages turning the confrontation into a victory story, and the framing unsettled him. Catherine understood why. She reminded him that setting a boundary had been necessary, but humiliating Camilla had never been the purpose. William agreed. The future king had wanted clarity, not celebration built around another person's defeat. The public moment became impossible to ignore. Crowds gathered along the railings outside Buckingham Palace, while cameras repeatedly focused on the headline, the future king draws the line. One broadcaster called it, "the morning the next reign became visible." William heard that phrase later and understood the danger inside it. People were not merely applauding a decision, they were beginning to project power onto him. Anne saw the same danger. The Princess Royal telephoned William privately and warned him not to enjoy the applause. "Authority," she told the prince, "becomes most dangerous immediately after people begin celebrating it." William listened, because Anne had been the person who forced the original confrontation away from emotion and toward rules. That warning shaped what he did next. William returned to Buckingham Palace later that day. He did not bring another accusation. He did not open another page. He brought the file back to Charles and Camilla for one final meeting. The world believed it had already witnessed his victory. But the real verdict would come when William closed the file permanently. The second meeting was nothing like the first. No senior courtiers lined the walls. No advisors waited for instructions. There was only Charles, Camilla, William, and the same file that had detonated the palace 24 hours earlier. William placed it on the table but did not open it. Instead, he told Camilla that the boundaries were now formal. The disputed channels were closed, and he had no intention of weaponizing her private mistakes again. Then he shut the folder with both hands. Charles confirmed the arrangement himself. The king made clear that Camilla would retain her full place beside him, but decisions involving William's future reign, Catherine's household, and planning around the children would remain under the prince's authority unless consultation was specifically requested. The future reign meant the structure of staff, duties, and decision-making that would support William when he eventually became king. The intermediary, who had blurred those lines, was permanently removed from that role. The informal channel was finished. Camilla did not pretend the settlement erased what happened. The Queen Consort told William the exposure had wounded her, especially because it happened before people whose respect mattered to her. The prince accepted responsibility for how severe the confrontation became. He did not apologize for drawing the boundary itself. Camilla understood the distinction, even if she did not like it. For once, neither tried to force the other into surrender. Charles placed his hand over the closed file. The king admitted that protecting his marriage had sometimes made him slow to recognize when protection became avoidance. He had defended Camilla so instinctively that he had not always asked whether the criticism itself deserved examination. The Queen Consort did not interrupt. She did not ask him to withdraw the admission. That silence marked a different kind of acceptance. William then revealed Catherine's final request. Once the institutional review was completed, the princess had urged him to destroy copies containing material that was purely personal and had no bearing on future authority. Camilla was stunned. Catherine had supported the confrontation, but she had also refused to preserve private ammunition for another war. Restraint had followed victory. William took the remaining file and locked it away as a concluded record, not an active weapon. That choice defined the ending. Accountability had been established. Revenge had been rejected. Camilla left with less influence but her dignity intact. Charles finally separated loyalty to his wife from duty to the future crown. William proved that his coming reign would not be governed by inherited emotional debts. The verdict was final. William had not exposed Camilla to remove her from the monarchy. He had opened the file to establish where one reign's authority ended and the next one's independence began. Then he closed it, and with it, the war. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.